This morning I talked a bit to begin with about something that happened to me when I was 11 years old. And this evening, because I quite like anecdotes, and I've been doing a lot of thinking about my past and why I'm the way I am and how things came to be. And that has to be true potentially for all of us. And I'm writing a book and having to go back in years and discovering new insights into things that happened to me way back then that are surprising me. So when I was 11, 12, I came to the end of my years in Sunday school in church, and the then vicar ran, and I think it was a new thing for him, a group for young people of my age in the church hall after the morning mass. It was quite a high church. It was a high church, had incense and stuff. And so I joined that group for the year. I think that's probably my first real encounter with him. He was called Peter Hand. His brother David Hand was bishop of somewhere in the Far East anyway. Peter, he must have been about 40 then. He looked rather like Yehudi Menuhin, the violinist. He had a very distinctive face. And he was tall, he was the same height as me. Quite austere. A long time later I discovered that he was gay, though he would have used the word homosexual about himself. And the thing I remember, because I felt shame, was that the week, I think it was the week before Palm Sunday, and on that Sunday the clocks went forward. Somebody was asked if they wanted to take the candlesticks home to clean them, and I cleaned them. And then my family forgot that the clocks were moving forward, so that I turned up an hour late, and I was mortified. And then I was confirmed and became an altar server, both at 9:15 sung Eucharist and on Saturday mornings at a 7:30 said Mass. Quite how I was getting, well, I suppose if kids do paper rounds it's all right. I must have been about 13 by then. And I must have done that with him every Saturday morning for a year or more. And it was held in the Lady Chapel at the side of a huge Edwardian church, and the Lady Chapel was rather dark, and the sanctuary, it was altar against the wall, and it had riddle posts and curtains round it. And we processed in and began with a very formal, there was a preparation in very high churches that happened between the priest and the server. So there I was, kneeling right next to him and wanting to get everything right. And it was, it was that kind of culture where everything had to be, in theory, spot on, and you knew where you were going to go next and what happened next, and it was all quite complicated liturgy, and you had to move books around and things. And so I was much more focused on getting things right than in any way being prayerful or spiritual. And in a way, that was the culture that I got inducted into. Going to church and participating in worship was about doing it the right way and getting it right. And because I'm a bit of a perfectionist, it was actually getting it perfect. And I always made sure that when I dressed, my hems were all neat and equal and da-da-da-da-da. And he was very musical. He played the piano, and he came to our house occasionally and played duets with my mother and my brother. And he must have formed, which I kind of haven't, quite a strong attachment to me. I sort of knew this, but I don't think I realised the import it had until just recently, when I kind of went back and revisited the experience. He didn't stay very long in the church. He must have been there about 4 years altogether, and 2 to 3 years in my life. And he then decided to emigrate from the UK and went to the Torres Straits, north of Australia, to take responsibility for a college that was educating Torres Straits Islanders. And it was kind of, to a 13-year-old me, the other side, well, it was the other side of the world. It was, pretty much as remote as you could get. And then his last weekend, the Friday evening, he invited the parish worker, woman parish worker, and me to the vicarage so that he could give us mementos of his friendship with us and his time at St Barnabas. And he gave me a little crucifix. I mean, it was nothing special, and I've still got that. and he gave me his collection of train tickets, because I was, and still am, fairly obsessed with steam trains and railways and so on, and I've still got them as well, though I haven't visited them for quite a long time. I don't know what he gave the parish worker, I wasn't really very interested. But looking back, it seems to me extraordinary that he invited me, a 13-year-old, on that penultimate evening in the parish to the vicarage to be given something. And so there was something unusually strong about the connection between us. And then the next morning I went to the 7:30 said Mass and served for him. And I was emotionally devastated. And I'm not sure the emotions didn't erupt until afterwards, when I'd kind of left the church with him, but I cried, I poured tears publicly streaming down my face all the way home. It was a huge loss to me of somebody who clearly, looking back, I remember the tears, but had had such an emotional impact on me. He was quite austere, but he had a wicked glint in his eyes. He could be really quite playful and naughty, and he had a sort of a profound presence and stillness. I don't think, I'm not sure I do even now, have any kind of orthodox concrete faith. Yeah, it's always been pretty sort of loose. But what I have had, I think, is what Peter Hand instilled in me, which was some almost unconscious or subconscious awareness that there could be in Christianity, because on the whole I haven't found it much in the institution of the church, but in individuals there could be this extraordinary, truthful, profound, holy presence. And he clearly had it. And I've met other people in my life who've had it as well, but they have been rare. Now, to kind of do an orthodox Christian thing and connect it with the readings. So there we have the two disciples going to the tomb and finding it empty and then going back, and Mary staying behind and wanting to know where the body is and being spoken to and turning round and not looking very clearly, and maybe whatever it was that there wasn't very clear to be looked at, but seeing in her mind Jesus. And when I read it in church, I tear up. I find it extraordinarily emotional. This moment of mysterious presence and recognition and otherness and uncertainty about what is there. And in John's Gospel, all the resurrection appearances, and in Matthew, Mark and Luke as well to some degree, have this uncertainty. When they've been out fishing and there he is on the lake shore cooking fish for them, and none of them dared ask who he was. They knew it was the Lord. But the uncertainty is there in the phrasing of the gospel. And that for me is core to the resurrection and resurrection experiences. They have to be uncertain, numinous encounters with something so profound that you know you are meeting ultimate truth, reality, goodness, love, givenness, presence, all the things that for me have become fundamental to what Christianity needs to be about and in many ways isn't. And I yearn for it as much, and in a way I've probably spent quite a lot of my life yearning for people like Peter Hand in my life. There were two more people that briefly I'll tell you about. When I was 23, 24, and I lived in Wimbledon in the Diocese of Southwark, and it was the 60s, and they were radical times. Who was alive in 1960 and remembering what happened in 1960 here? Who dares to admit? Yeah, okay, so 1960, I was 15 in the grammar school, and Lady Chatterley's Lover was published. And for those who were, alive then, it was dramatic. There was a court case to fight for the ability to actually publish it, and every schoolboy knew that there was something very naughty about it because it was all about sex and it had very rude words in it. So, It was a dramatic moment, and samizdat copies of it were being passed around the classroom. Of course they were. I wasn't very interested because it seemed to be about straight people rather than gay people, but there we are. You know, we never quite get it. And that, yeah, and you know, I knew I was gay at 11. That was this morning's sermon in part. But where on earth to meet other gay people, I had no idea whatsoever. And certainly didn't know that Peter Hand himself was gay. So the 23, 24-year-old me experience, the Southwark Diocese ran a series of 3 weekends for young adults, which meant in your early 20s then, might be a slightly lower age group now. And they were residential in a retreat house in Sussex, and they were led by Derek Tasker, who in some ways was similar to Peter Hand. He was taller, he was 6'6" tall. He wasn't fat, but he was, you know, he was a very dignified, well-built man, quite austere, also gay. See, gay people run as a stream through my experience, and I suspect through many people's experience of some of the best qualities in church life. And what I remember particularly was that he presided at the Eucharist each morning, each of those weekends. I have never since then met anybody who was so profoundly really present, standing at the altar and presiding. And he showed me what real presence meant. It was a human being who was profoundly connected, absolutely inhabiting his body and his emotions, and knowing the truth of what he was doing in breaking bread and sharing wine. And the other person leading the weekends with him was the diocesan youth worker, Gwen Reimer. Derek died some time ago, but Gwen is still alive. Gwen was a Camberwell lass, St George's Camberwell, which is where I, sometime afterwards, went and served my curacy. And Gwen was probably lesbian, actually, and rather broad-hipped and Camberwell vulgar. Yeah? And Gwen smoked capaciously and sank whiskey capaciously and swore Lady Chatterley, and was just wonderful and vibrant and real, you know, and connected and vulgar and truth incarnate. And the two of them together leading these weekends showed me, like nothing else has, and certainly hadn't before then, that you could be both profoundly spiritual, silent, still, attentive, reflective, and fully human, honest, vulgar, connected, enjoying the good, rich things of life, you know? And that they belonged together in anybody who was going to be authentically Christian and authentically Christ-like. And somehow the church still wipes out that side of Jesus' character that could convert gallons of water into wine and enjoy lavish, raucous meals with wonderful food and company and prostitutes and tax collectors and sinners, all the vulgar who knew how to enjoy themselves. At least there's more truth and groundedness and reality here this evening, and always in worship here, than I meet in almost every other church context that I worship in. And I thank God for places like this, and for everyone who holds the complexity of Christian truth and faith and human truth, because they're co-equal, and Jesus is not some kind of holy, special other person, and nor is Mary Magdalene, or St Peter, or St John. What they were, followers of Jesus, were fully human, enjoying life, and able to read books like Lady Chatterley, and enjoy a good drink, and a good joke, and a good laugh. And we, followers of Jesus, it's not just that if we're LGBT or I or pro-gay straight people, need to be weaving a path in the church that shows the church how profoundly Christian we are and created in the image of God, all of us. And we need to show the church how much it needs to change and transform its practice and understanding to genuinely include all of us. But we are also for the whole world. People who can show what it means. People don't need to come to church. Everybody has the profundity of God in them and in their lives and hearts and energy. And wherever we meet people, in pubs, clubs, trains, buses, next door, and whatever they're like. And I tell you, I have prejudices just as much as anybody else that I try and suppress or overcome. But I know, if I can, remember that everybody I meet has divinity within them. And the church still wants to separate people into sheep and goats, and to treat the sheep differently and imagine that God is going to treat the sheep differently. And it's crap. And that is not what Jesus taught and embodied, and not what the Gospels describe, and it's not what we follow. But following that authentic path is a real challenge at a time when the church sinks more and more into kind of conservatism and loss of vision of what it really means to be Christ-like and following Jesus.